Good morning, everyone. Today I want to talk about something many of us struggle with, but few talk about openly: emotional detachment. The first step to emotionally detaching in a healthy way is to become aware of when you're overly attached in the first place, and that recognition isn't always as obvious as it sounds. Emotional overattachment doesn't just show up in romantic relationships. It can happen with friends, family, co-workers, or even ideas and outcomes. Some signs are subtle, like constantly thinking about how someone else feels, replaying conversations in your head, or feeling anxious when someone doesn't respond to a message right away. You might find yourself bending your boundaries to avoid conflict, feeling guilty for saying no, or becoming overly invested in someone else's life decisions, even when they haven't asked for your help or input. These are signs you're crossing the line from caring to carrying. It can also show up as emotional dependence, where your sense of self-worth, stability, or happiness starts to rely heavily on someone else's attention or approval. If their mood swings, your mood swings. If they pull away, you spiral. You feel responsible for their feelings, and at the same time, you may expect them to rescue you from your own. This kind of attachment creates a fragile emotional foundation where your peace is always at the mercy of someone else's behavior. Another big red flag is the fear of loss or rejection that controls your actions. You may find yourself tolerating disrespect or mistreatment just to avoid being abandoned. You stay in situations that no longer serve you because the idea of being alone feels unbearable. That fear can drive you to cling, to fix, to sacrifice yourself in order to keep the peace, even when it's costing you your mental and emotional well-being. Sometimes emotional overattachment disguises itself as loyalty or love, but at its core, it often comes from unresolved wounds like abandonment, low self-esteem, or past trauma. If you feel like you need someone in order to feel whole or safe, that's a sign that your emotional attachment might not be rooted in genuine connection, but in fear or lack. Recognizing all of this is not about judging yourself, it's about gently becoming aware of what's really happening underneath your emotions. When you can name it, you can start to change it. Emotional attachment isn't bad in itself, but when it becomes excessive, it can lead to imbalance, anxiety, and a loss of self. The goal is not to stop feeling, but to stop losing yourself in what you feel. And that begins by recognizing when and where you're holding on too tightly. Once you begin to recognize emotional overattachment, the next vital step is to turn inward and build self-awareness. Emotional detachment isn't about cutting off emotions. It's about understanding them deeply enough that they don't control you. And that clarity only comes through self-awareness. Self-awareness is the ability to observe your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors without immediately reacting to them. It's like stepping outside of yourself and seeing the whole picture clearly. Why you feel what you feel, where it comes from, and how it's influencing your actions. To cultivate this, you need to begin noticing patterns in your emotional life. For example, do you constantly seek validation in relationships? Do you shut down when someone pulls away? Do you overextend yourself to feel needed or worthy? These recurring behaviors often stem from old emotional wounds or unmet needs, things you may not even be conscious of yet. But when you take the time to reflect, you can start connecting the dots. One powerful way to do this is through journaling. Writing down your emotions and experiences helps bring the unconscious to the surface. You can ask yourself questions like, what am I feeling right now? What triggered this feeling? Is this reaction about the present moment? Or does it remind me of something from my past? When you start answering questions like these with honesty and compassion, you begin to see the root causes of your emotional responses. For example, maybe you always feel panicked when someone distances themselves, not because of what's happening now, but because it mirrors how you were abandoned or neglected as a child. That insight is powerful. It allows you to respond from the present instead of reacting from an old wound. Another important part of self-awareness is noticing your internal dialogue. What are you telling yourself when things go wrong? Are you harsh and self-critical, or do you show yourself understanding? That voice inside your head drives your emotional experience more than you might realize. Cultivating self-awareness means not just hearing that voice, but challenging it, questioning it, and eventually reshaping it. You also want to pay attention to your physical and emotional reactions. Your body often knows what your mind hasn't caught up with yet. If your stomach tightens when someone speaks to you a certain way, or you feel a wave of anxiety before a conversation, those are signals worth exploring. Your body holds emotional memory, and tuning into it can unlock insight you might miss if you only focus on logic. The goal isn't to analyze yourself into exhaustion. It's to understand yourself with curiosity, not judgment. The more aware you are of your emotional landscape, the more choice you have in how you respond to it. Instead of being swept up in intense emotions or driven by unconscious fears, you learn to pause, reflect, and make intentional decisions. Emotional detachment without self-awareness is just emotional suppression. But when you combine detachment with deep self-understanding, you begin to create space between what you feel and what you do. That space is where your power lives. And the more you build self-awareness, the stronger and more stable that power becomes. One of the biggest sources of emotional suffering and a major obstacle to healthy detachment is the deeply human desire to control. We want to control how people treat us, how relationships unfold, how conversations go, and how life plays out. We want predictable outcomes, guaranteed returns on our emotional investments. And when things don't go according to our plans, it can feel like the ground is falling out from under us. But the truth is, control is an illusion, especially when it comes to other people and unpredictable life events. You can't control someone else's feelings. You can't control their choices, their growth process, or the way they show up for you. You can't force someone to love you more, treat you better, or change in the ways you think they should. Trying to do so not only drains your energy, it often backfires and damages the very connection you're trying to preserve. That need for control often stems from fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being out of control emotionally. So we micromanage. We obsess over text messages, we overthink conversations, we create unspoken expectations and silently tally up the ways they're not being met. We try to fix people, solve their problems, or save them, believing that if we can just keep everything and everyone in line, we'll feel safe and secure. But control doesn't lead to peace, it leads to anxiety, resentment, and disappointment. To emotionally detach, you must learn to release your grip on how things should be and accept them as they are. This doesn't mean giving up or becoming passive. It means acknowledging that you are only responsible for your own actions, choices, and reactions, not someone else's. You can communicate clearly, set healthy boundaries, and express your truth. But beyond that, you must let people be who they are and allow events to unfold naturally. Letting go also means accepting that sometimes people won't show up the way you hoped. Sometimes the story you envisioned for a relationship, a job, or a life path won't play out the way you imagine, and that's okay. Emotional detachment allows you to stop clinging to specific outcomes and start embracing the freedom of openness. When you're not attached to how things must happen, you create space for how they can happen, often in ways that surprise you or serve you better in the long run. Another aspect of control is trying to manage how others perceive you. We often contort ourselves emotionally, trying to be liked, accepted, or understood. But this is just another form of control, one that slowly erodes authenticity. Emotional detachment invites you to stop performing for acceptance and start living in alignment with your truth, regardless of how others respond. Letting go of control is a practice, not a one-time decision. It means learning to tolerate uncertainty without spiraling, to feel your feelings without acting on every impulse, and to trust that you can handle whatever comes your way, even if it's uncomfortable or unfamiliar. It's about surrendering your need to force peace and instead allowing peace to emerge from your ability to release what's outside of your control. When you stop trying to control outcomes and people, you begin to reclaim your energy. You stop pouring yourself into things you were never meant to hold. And in that space, you can finally find the clarity, calm, and emotional freedom you've been chasing when emotions run high. Whether it's anger, sadness, anxiety, or fear, it's easy to get caught up in the intensity of the moment. You might say something you don't mean, make decisions you later regret, or feel completely overwhelmed by a wave of emotion that seems bigger than you. Emotional detachment isn't about suppressing those feelings or pretending they're not there. It's about staying grounded enough that your emotions don't hijack your clarity. And mindfulness is one of the most effective tools to help you do that. Mindfulness is the practice of being fully present in the here and now without judgment. It's about observing your thoughts and emotions as they arise without immediately reacting to them or getting swept away. This awareness creates space between what you feel and what you choose to do next. Think of it like this: when you're not mindful, you're in the passenger seat of your emotional experience, being driven by every twist and turn. But when you are mindful, you move into the driver's seat. You're still on the same road, but now you have the steering wheel. You're able to respond instead of react. For example, let's say you receive a message that upsets you. Without mindfulness, you might impulsively lash out, spiral into overthinking, or internalize it as something being wrong with you. But with mindfulness, you can pause. You notice the heat rising in your chest, the tightness in your stomach, the angry thoughts forming, and you just sit with it. You breathe. You name what you're feeling. I feel hurt, or I feel rejected. That simple act of naming creates distance and softens the grip of emotion. Mindfulness helps you become a witness to your emotions rather than a prisoner of them. You're no longer fighting against your feelings or drowning in them. You're simply noticing them, allowing them to pass through like clouds moving across the sky. Practicing mindfulness also enhances your ability to tune into the present moment, which is where peace exists. So often, emotional attachment keeps us trapped in either the past, rehashing old wounds, regrets, and what ifs, or in the future, worrying about what might happen or what someone might do. Mindfulness pulls you out of those mental loops and brings you back to now, where you're safe, whole, and grounded. There are many ways to practice mindfulness. It can be as structured as a daily meditation or as simple as focusing on your breath for a few moments when you feel overwhelmed. It can happen while you're walking, eating, listening to music, or even during a difficult conversation. The key is to bring your full awareness to the moment, notice what's happening inside and around you, and resist the urge to judge or fix it right away. Mindfulness also helps you develop emotional resilience. The more you practice staying present with discomfort without pushing it away or reacting, you build inner strength. You begin to trust that you can feel hard things without falling apart. And that's a crucial part of emotional detachment. The ability to sit with uncomfortable emotions without letting them dictate your words, choices, or sense of self. When you slow down and listen deeply, you begin to hear the quieter voice beneath the noise, the part of you that knows what you need, what you value, and what brings you peace. This connection to self becomes an anchor, helping you stay steady even when emotions around you are turbulent. In short, mindfulness isn't just a technique. It's a way of being. It trains you to show up in your life with calm awareness and gentle clarity, which makes emotional detachment not only possible, but natural. One of the most vital parts of emotional detachment is having the strength and clarity to set healthy emotional boundaries, and just as importantly, to maintain them consistently. Without boundaries, you risk being pulled into everyone else's emotional storms, overextending yourself, and ultimately losing sight of where you end and someone else begins. A boundary is not a wall. It's a bridge that allows you to connect with others while still honoring your own space, needs, and emotional well-being. Boundaries are how you teach people how to treat you, but they also protect you from sacrificing your peace for the sake of pleasing others or keeping the peace externally while chaos brews within. Many people struggle with boundaries because they equate them with being selfish or unkind. But in truth, setting boundaries is an act of self-respect and also a form of respect for others. It creates clarity in relationships, prevents resentment, and encourages mutual responsibility. When you clearly communicate what you can and can't give, what you will and won't accept, you invite others to show up with the same honesty. Setting emotional boundaries starts with knowing what drains you, what triggers you, and what feels unsafe or overwhelming. For instance, if you constantly feel emotionally depleted after a conversation with someone who vents nonstop but never asks how you're doing, that's a signal. Or if someone frequently crosses lines by guilt-tripping you, overstepping your privacy, or expecting you to be available 24/7, it's time to draw a clear boundary. But boundaries aren't just about other people, they're also about your own behavior. You may need to set boundaries with yourself, when to stop overthinking, when to stop overgiving, when to pause before responding emotionally, or when to walk away from situations that no longer serve your growth. Emotional detachment requires you to be the guardian of your own energy, attention, and inner peace. One of the most important and challenging aspects of boundaries is enforcement. It's not enough to say what you need if you don't follow through when the boundary is crossed. This doesn't mean reacting with anger or cutting people off at the first misstep. It means communicating clearly and holding your ground with calm firmness. For example, if someone continually dismisses your feelings, despite you expressing how that affects you, you may need to limit your emotional availability in that relationship. Boundaries also require you to release the fear of how others will respond. Yes, some people may not like your boundaries, especially if they benefited from you not having any, but that discomfort is not a reason to abandon yourself. Emotional detachment means being okay with the fact that people might misunderstand you, get upset, or even walk away, and knowing that protecting your emotional well-being is not only your right, but your responsibility. Maintaining boundaries becomes easier when you're anchored in your self-worth. When you believe you are deserving of peace, respect, and emotional safety, you're less likely to tolerate behavior that chips away at those things. Boundaries stop feeling like a scary confrontation and start feeling like an expression of love for yourself and for the health of your connections. It's important to remember, too, that boundaries are not fixed. They evolve. As you grow, your emotional capacity and your awareness will shift. What you once tolerated, you may no longer accept. What you once gave freely, you may now need to protect. Emotional detachment gives you permission to continually check in with yourself and adjust your boundaries to reflect your current needs and priorities. In the end, boundaries are not about keeping people out, they're about keeping your center intact. They create the conditions for emotional clarity, mutual respect, and deeper, more honest relationships. Without them, detachment turns into distance. With them, detachment becomes discernment. When we talk about emotionally detaching, we often focus on the external, what to let go of, who to set boundaries with, how to stop overreacting or overinvesting in other people's lives. But what truly makes detachment possible and sustainable is what's happening within you. That's where your inner life comes in. The thoughts you nurture, the values you hold close, the relationship you have with yourself when the world is quiet. Your inner life is your emotional home. It's the place where your self-awareness lives, where your beliefs and dreams reside, where you find refuge from chaos or confusion. If you don't invest in your inner world, you'll always be seeking external sources of comfort, identity, and direction. And when those external sources shift, as they inevitably do, you'll feel lost, unsteady, even hollow. Nurturing your inner life means reconnecting with yourself on a deeper level and giving time and space to your thoughts, emotions, creativity, and spiritual or philosophical beliefs, whatever grounds you and brings you meaning. It's about building a strong, rich, internal ecosystem so you don't feel empty or anxious when you begin to detach from toxic patterns, relationships, or expectations. Start by asking yourself, what fills me up when I'm alone? What makes me feel most like myself? When do I feel most grounded, most alive? Nurturing your inner life can look like journaling to explore your thoughts, reading books that stretch your perspective, creating art that channels your emotions, or spending quiet time in nature to recenter. Could be prayer, meditation, music, or mindful movement. Anything that helps you come home to yourself. The more you nurture your inner world, the less you'll rely on outer circumstances to dictate how you feel. You'll begin to experience a sense of emotional stability that isn't easily shaken by someone else's behavior or unpredictable life events. You'll stop chasing validation and connection in unhealthy ways because you've cultivated a sense of self that already feels whole and connected from the inside. A strong inner life also gives you clarity in moments of emotional chaos. When you're grounded in your values, your purpose, and your self-acknowledge, it becomes easier to know when something or someone is out of alignment with you. You can spot manipulation or emotional dependency sooner. You can say no without guilt, walk away without confusion, and rest in your own solitude without loneliness. It also builds emotional resilience. Life will always include disappointment, change, and uncertainty. But when you've invested in your inner life, you have an internal well to draw from. Instead of reaching outward for escape or rescue, you turn inward for comfort, strength, and insight. Your relationship with yourself becomes your anchor. It's important to note that nurturing your inner life is not a one-time act. It's an ongoing practice. It's checking in with your emotional state regularly. It's asking yourself, what do I need today that I can give myself? It's slowing down long enough to hear your own voice beneath the noise. It's about treating your inner world with the same attention and care you might give to a partner, a friend, or a creative project. And in doing so, you begin to build a life that doesn't depend on outside forces to feel full. You cultivate inner peace not because everything around you is calm, but because you've made peace your internal default setting. You build an emotional sanctuary that no one can take from you. And that's what makes emotional detachment not a loss, but a return to you. One of the most misunderstood ideas when it comes to emotional detachment is the belief that it means cutting people off, becoming emotionally cold, or shutting yourself down to protect yourself from pain. That's not detachment, that's disconnection. And while they may look similar on the surface, the two are profoundly different in intention, experience, and outcome. Disconnection is a form of emotional withdrawal that often stems from fear, trauma, or a desire to avoid vulnerability. It's a coping mechanism, often unconscious, that numbs feelings, distances you from others, and blocks emotional intimacy. When you're disconnected, you're not just protecting yourself from negative emotions, you're cutting yourself off from all emotional depth, including joy, love, empathy, and real connection. Disconnection says, I won't feel anything because it's safer that way. In contrast, emotional detachment is a conscious, healthy practice of holding space between yourself and what you cannot control. It's not about shutting down, it's about stepping back with clarity, staying centered, and choosing how to engage without being consumed. Detachment says, I will feel, but I will not be ruled by what I feel. This distinction matters, especially if you've been hurt in the past and your instinct is to retreat emotionally. Emotional disconnection can masquerade as strength. It can feel like protection, but over time it leads to isolation, numbness, and a deep sense of being unseen or misunderstood, even by yourself. It keeps relationships shallow and interactions transactional. You might feel safe, but you also feel empty, like something vital is missing. Detachment, however, keeps your heart open while also protecting your peace. It allows you to engage with others authentically while still honoring your boundaries and emotional needs. It helps you care deeply without collapsing into someone else's emotions. It allows you to listen without absorbing, love without losing yourself, and give without draining your own cup. Understanding this difference also helps you navigate relationships with more nuance. If you're emotionally detached, you can stay present during conflict without escalating. You can be compassionate towards someone's struggle without taking responsibility for fixing it. You can walk away from toxic dynamics with grace instead of bitterness. Not because you don't care, but because you've learned that caring doesn't mean clinging. On the other hand, disconnection often creates a pattern of avoidance or emotional unavailability. If you find yourself emotionally numbing, ghosting people when things get intense, or using silence as a way to avoid vulnerability, that may be a sign that you're not detaching, you're disconnecting. And while disconnection can feel like relief in the short term, over time, it deprives you of meaningful experiences and emotional growth. To tell the difference in your own life, ask yourself, am I creating space because I want to stay grounded or because I want to escape feeling? Am I holding boundaries because I love myself, or am I building walls because I'm afraid? Am I choosing emotional clarity, or am I numbing because I don't want to deal? The answers to these questions can help you course correct and move from disconnection back toward healthy detachment. Because true detachment doesn't require you to stop feeling, it invites you to feel fully and still choose peace. It's an emotionally mature response to a world that can be overwhelming. It's not a retreat from life, it's a new way of standing in it with strength, intention, and inner calm. Ultimately, detachment keeps you engaged in life without getting entangled in it. It allows you to connect without absorbing, to empathize without internalizing, and to love without losing your center. Disconnection, meanwhile, pushes life away entirely, and in doing so, pushes away the very healing, growth, and intimacy that emotional detachment can actually help make possible. Emotional detachment isn't a one-time decision or a fixed state of being. It's a practice, a discipline, and in many ways, an emotional art form. Like any skill worth learning, it requires repetition, awareness, patience, and grace with yourself. You don't simply wake up one day and master detachment. You grow into it, one moment, one trigger, and one boundary at a time. At first, detachment may feel awkward or even painful, especially if you're used to over-detachment in relationships, tying your worth to other people's approval or absorbing everyone else's emotions as your own. It may feel unnatural to step back instead of stepping in. It may feel cold to withhold immediate emotional reactions, or strange to not chase closure, validation, or reciprocation. But what you're really doing in those moments is retraining your nervous system, teaching it that you don't need to latch on, fix, or control in order to be safe. This process doesn't unfold perfectly. There will be days where your emotional triggers win, days where you fall back into old patterns, where you overthink, overreact, or overextend yourself for someone else. And that's okay. The point isn't to be perfect at detachment. The point is to keep practicing, to keep showing up, and to notice your progress even when it's subtle. Every time you choose not to send that reactive message, every time you give yourself space before responding emotionally, every time you acknowledge your feelings without letting them control your behavior, you are practicing detachment, and every one of those moments counts. Over time, what once felt like a huge emotional storm begins to shrink in intensity. The things that used to keep you up at night, the unanswered messages, the opinions of others, the unresolved tension, no longer grip you with the same force. You start to notice a growing stillness within yourself, a softness, a strength that doesn't come from shutting down, but from standing tall in your center. Like any practice, detachment also deepens with self-reflection. Each emotionally charged situation becomes a mirror. What did I feel? Why did I react that way? What was I afraid of losing or being? Where did I abandon myself to hold on to someone else? These are powerful questions that help you peel back the layers of emotional conditioning and move closer to your authentic self. You'll also notice that as your detachment strengthens, your sense of inner peace becomes less negotiable. You become more selective with your energy, less reactive to drama, and more intentional about where and how you invest your emotions. You no longer give away your power to every mood, opinion, or situation that crosses your path. Instead, you develop an emotional posture that is steady, discerning, and grounded. Detachment is also a kind of emotional resilience training. Each time you choose it, you're proving to yourself that you can feel discomfort and still stay rooted, that you can care deeply and still walk away when it's time, that you can experience emotional waves and not be pulled under. And this emotional strength, once developed, spills over into every area of your life, your relationships, your work, your decision-making, your self-talk. The key is to keep practicing, even when it feels uncomfortable, to return to your breath, to your boundaries, to your inner life again and again. To remember that you are not your reactions, not your triggers, not your past patterns. You are the one observing them, learning from them, growing through them, and the more you practice, the more natural detachment becomes, not as a shield, but as a skill, not as an escape, but as an anchor, not as indifference, but as deep self-respect in motion. In conclusion, emotional detachment is not about shutting yourself off from the world or becoming emotionally unavailable. Instead, it is about learning to navigate your emotions with grace, wisdom, and a sense of self-preservation. By recognizing the signs of emotional overattachment, cultivating self-awareness, letting go of the need to control, practicing mindfulness, setting and maintaining healthy boundaries, nurturing your inner life, understanding the difference between detachment and disconnection, and continually practicing detachment as a skill, you create a more balanced and fulfilling emotional landscape. As we journey through life, we will inevitably encounter challenges, relationships, and situations that test our emotional resilience. However, by integrating the principles of emotional detachment into our lives, we empower ourselves to respond with clarity and intention rather than reacting from a place of fear or anxiety. So let us commit to this practice together. Let us embrace the journey of emotional detachment as an opportunity for growth, self-discovery, and deeper connections with ourselves and others. By doing so, we can foster healthier relationships, protect our emotional well-being, and ultimately create a life filled with peace, authenticity, and joy. Thank you for your attention, and I encourage each of you to explore and embrace the art of emotional detachment in your own lives.